Howdy, everybody. Shasta College. How was your weekend? This is Humanities 4. We're into 6 or 7 weeks already. We're past the halfway point. Hope you're all doing well, getting your papers in on time. I'm impressed with the essays. I haven't looked at the test yet. I'm a little scared to look at the tests. I'll look at those this week and have them graded. And you have a new assignment that I signed last week, due this week. And I think I'll skip this week for assignments because I got to catch up on my grading. But today I want to talk about experimental films, art films, um, avant-garde films, whatever term you want to use. They're outside the mainstream. These aren't Hollywood films at all. They're way outside there, but somehow they got a foothold into the world that we live in. And at the time, not very many art films squeeze through nowadays in this day of DC and Marvel comics dominating everything. Um, when I say an art film, I'm talking about a film that doesn't have any commercial value or happy endings or predictability. Um, you got to think about them. You got to figure them out. They could be a puzzle. Persona is probably the closest you've come to seeing an art film. That's definitely an art film. Um, that would never have gotten made in the United States ever. But in Sweden, in Europe, they're ahead of us that way in their mentality, their education, what they're willing to sit through and look at and grasp without having easy answers. So these films I'm giving you today don't have easy answers. Just sit back and let them allure you into their brilliance. And they are brilliant. I only give you guys brilliant films to look at, but this bunch of films here takes a little practice. It's like reading a good novel. It takes practice. It's not going to give it to you anything easy. These aren't bestseller movies, but they're groundbreaking movies. Talk about one movie called El Topo, which means the mole, and it was filmed in Mexico by an Argentinian filmmaker who mostly lives in France, Alejandro Jodorowsky, who's in his 90s now. He's still contemplating a new film. He is brilliant, beyond brilliant. When I first saw this film, it came out in 71 or so, 72 maybe. I was confused to understand it's kind of a takeoff on spaghetti westerns and the Bible. Somehow we got both those things in there. And there's a lot of brilliant imagery, but there's a lot of savagery. There's violence. There's rape. There's dwarfs running around doing weird things. It's like a cerebral nightmare, an art piece, a painting uh, done by Munch, who did the Scream painting. Maybe you know it. Uh, it's like, what is hell's going on here? And when I first saw this, I was a little too young. I appreciated it. I loved the imagery. I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, but I didn't grasp it all. And after 4 or 5 more viewings and talking to a lot of scholars and people who know Bible scholars, not just the Bible, but Buddhism and Hinduism, it's all in there. And spaghetti Western gunfights. It's a weird combination. I'll show you a clip of it in modules. Please take a look at it or find the movie and check it out. If anybody wants any extra credit for 10 points, you can write about El Topo. Critically analyze El Topo. Tell me you're going to do it. I'll give you the 10 extra points if you need them. It's a challenge. Are you up to it? Alejandro Jodorowsky had an interesting background. He's an intellectual from Argentina, but there wasn't much art scene in Argentina. He studied mime in France with Marcel Marceau. And so there's a lot of movement, interesting movement in his movies. The imagery is surreal, very based on Kurosawa's imagery. Um, and spaghetti Western imagery. Um, and so it makes it challenging and beautiful to look at it and disturbing. And he plays the central part, by the way, of the gunfighter with no name who goes on this journey from gunfighter to religious fervor to being a monk living with the stable to being a revolutionary. So there's a great trajectory in his story. And this film captured the zeitgeist of the era. We're coming out of the 60s now. It's got a very 60s vibe about it, searching different religions, not no easy answers, violence. That was popularized by spaghetti westerns and Sam Peckinpah and the Wild Bunch, Arthur Penn and Bonnie and Clyde. It looks cool. It did, and even though it's disturbing as hell, and it is kind of a version, his version of Hell on Earth. Um, El Topo, Alejandro Jodorowsky. That's a name. He went on to direct half a dozen other movies. Holy Mountain is a real trip. I mean, literally a trip with even more religious imagery, more violence, more questioning who we are as humans. And he filmed also that in Mexico, where they gave him he's considered godlike down there, and they give him anything he wants. He's never filmed in the States. Why would he? Anyway, he had one chance at an American distributor for a film he thought he was going to direct from a bestseller novel called Dune by Frank Herbert. Maybe you've seen the movies, maybe you've read the book if you're lucky. And he worked on that for about 2 or 3 years. He literally created all the images for the movie by drawing them out. This is long before computers, folks. They're hand drawn with music, camera moves. He was going to who he was going to cast. He was hoping to cast, but the powers that be felt it was way too esoteric, way too avant-garde, artistic, artful, and disturbing. But if you read the book, it's got all that in there. And so they gave the film to David Lynch, who was not the right filmmaker. David Lynch is on this list with one of his films, but Dune, he was not the man for Dune. He really wasn't. If you've seen Dune, the original one that came out 78 or something, maybe 81, Sting is in it, the rock star Sting, if you know who that is. Um, all filmed on a kind of phony looking set. It I read the book and I loved it and was totally disappointed in that movie. And it's grotesque in all the right places, has some good David Lynch touches, but it did not resonate with audiences at the box office. They remade it recently into a miniseries, which I started watching. It's really good. It looks like they're more faithful to the book. Um, so check that out. But anyway, Alejandro Jodorowsky, an intellectual artist of the highest order, is on the top of my list for artistic experimental films that hit the mainstream. It did. These films played in college towns. They got reviewed. They got accolades. They never played at your local mall. But the alternative types, the intellectuals in colleges, the hippies all sought these films out and made them successful when it comes to not box office, but to seeing something of an intellectual nature that isn't easy to watch, but profound and life changing. Literally, life changing. Um, Eraserhead was made by David Lynch, who I mentioned earlier. Maybe you know him from he had done Mulholland Drive, and he also did Twin Peaks, the TV series. Maybe you've seen Wild at Heart, Blue Velvet. These are kind of edgy, crime-ridden underground films that have Hollywood people in it. And he got Hollywood money to do it. He did Elephant Man, based on the play. That was a success. But his first movie was a student film called Eraserhead. What does this sound? Well, you have to watch the movie to figure that one out because it's a nice puzzle. It's beautiful, shot in beautiful black and white over a 3-year period. Whenever he came up with the money, they'd meet for an act on the weekends. The acting troupe and the crew believed in the project. And it essentially helped start a midnight circuit movie thing that never happened before. They didn't know where to put it. It wasn't going to play in a mainstream theater, but someone came up with the idea. I'm not sure whom. You can look it up to screen a movie like this or El Topo at midnight when everybody's safely in bed, but the seekers, the intellectual artist seekers, the stoners don't want to go to bed early. They want to go see a cool movie. Well, this made a huge market for that. There's a couple of films on here that were hits. They actually made money in the Midnight Circuit movie. Another one would be Pink Flamingos by John Waters. The movie was too tough for people to look at, but midnight people are smoking a joint, dropping some acid, and they're feeling pretty good, and they're more acceptable than a straight audience that goes to the mall. So Eraserhead, difficult film about a lonely, lonesome guy who's living a life of drudgery in like an industrial backwater. Um, the imagery is brilliant. The soundtrack is disturbing, meaning it's industrial noise, not music so much, but noise. And this poor guy is trying to find some help, some love in the world, and he meets a woman, and they have a baby who's literally a monster. The baby is a monster, literally a monster, folks. And the wife can't take it, and she moves out of the house, and he's raising the monster. And he has an affection for them. It is his monster child. He has an affection for the monster, but it is a monster. And they created this incredible weird puppet that Lynch helped create. And watching him care for this puppet is totally disturbing and actually heartwarming because he's the father and he's trying to do the right thing, even though the thing is a monster. Doesn't end well for anybody, this movie. It's funnier in hell. When I first saw it, I thought it was a comedy. The humor is dark, 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 black humor. But there's humor and salvation in Eraserhead. I dare you to watch it. Anyway, David Lynch. Andy Warhol, the artist who did the Campbell soup cans and the Marilyn Monroe paintings and so many others, helped manage the Velvet Underground, helped start what they call pop art in the early 60s, middle 60s. He got tired of painting, and so he got a movie camera and he started filming movies. They're not easy to watch, folks, because, well, they're boring. They can be. Let's put it this way. He did one called Sleep, and it shows a guy sleeping for 8 hours. That's it. That's the entire movie. He's really sleeping, folks. Every 10 minutes in those days, 16 millimeter film, you have to change the reel. So every 10 minutes, they had to change the reel, film another 10 minutes for 8 hours. That's a lot of film on a very boring subject. But he played it in art houses and museums, and they got a following. He did another one called Empire State Building, where he filmed the Empire State Building in New York in one 24-hour cycle. Once again, he aimed the camera at the same place, filmed it from the same angle, had to keep changing the reels. That's a lot of reels, folks. To if you think about 10-minute reels to make a 24-hour film, that's a lot of film. And he would just grind it through the camera. There's no story, there's nothing, but there's everything. Because it shows the Empire State Building from daylight to dark to daylight again. The life of the building. Lights coming on, lights going off, people coming in, people coming out. So it really does tell the story of modern New York when he filmed that in the 60s, 66 or so, thereabouts. But nobody, it's hard to sit through it. You can't really. And so he would hold these parties. It'd be a party, and that would be screening on the wall. So Warhol, because of his name and his reputation, people perked up at these films. One of them that got actually real reviews, Chelsea Girls, starring Nico, the singer from the Velvet Underground, and other people, Viva, Ultraviolet, all his people that worked around him. Um, were in the movie, all set at the Chelsea Hotel, famous Chelsea Hotel in New York City. Has more of a story, not much. No camera, tricky camera shots. It's just people kind of existing at the Chelsea Hotel. And it was one of his more popular. And this stuff got out into the colleges, universities, and the art palaces around the country. There wasn't that many, but there's usually an art house in every university town that would play it for a day or two or a week, and people came to see it. So there was an audience because it was a movie by Andy Warhol. He didn't believe in moving the camera. He didn't believe in talking to the actors. And they just went for it. So it's the mundane life, daily life, and every once in a while there'd be some sex, graphic sex, by the way. Does that interest you? Because when we have sex, it is graphic, folks. Um, and then they go off and hang out and talk about boring subjects again. And he did several of these films, put him on the map as an underground filmmaker. John Waters is a guy from Baltimore. He had a troupe of actors who were dedicated to him. Did this movie called Pink Flamingos. Started transvestite by the name of Divine, and it's hard to describe what it's about. You have to look at it, watch it. I'll show you if I can find a preview of it. You'll see a preview. Please look at the preview. You might get a thrill out of it or not. But it had a controversial. John was always pushing the envelope on what was considered crass or crude or vulgar, because all his movies are all that. And in one scene, he has Divine literally eating dog poop right out of the dog's. The dog just pooped on camera, and he scooped it up and ate it. It turned everybody off so bad, and these images never leave your head. And from then on, he had this reputation as the filmmaker whose actors have to eat dog poop. And made his reputation. He's still out there. He's a little bit older than me, and went some mainstream movies. He did a thing called Hairspray. John Travolta's in Hairspray. Plays two roles. He plays the woman. So it turned into a Broadway musical. It was a huge hit. So he's had some mainstream successes. Hasn't made a movie in a while. I don't know if he'll ever make another one. Now he mostly writes books, travels the country, and lectures about the wonderful avant-garde life. The last movie I want to talk about was a big film when it came out. directed by Stanley Kubrick, a major director who had directed 2001: A Space Odyssey, Paths of Glory. This film was unlike anything he'd ever done before, based on a novel by Burgess Meredith, which I read, by the way, called A Clockwork Orange. And it's a big budgeted film filmed in London. Kubrick was an American. Once he moved to London, he never left London. He didn't travel at all anymore. All his movies are filmed in London. If you've ever seen the Vietnam movie Full Metal Jacket, which he directed, filmed in London, folks, not Vietnam. And if you watch the movie, you'll think you're in Vietnam. Yes, they transported in palm trees. They made London, the outskirts of London, look like the outskirts of Saigon, and you wouldn't know it wasn't filmed there. Anyway, he had a lot of successes as being this very art at supreme cinema director. He went on to direct The Shining with Jack Nicholson, really successful horror movie. We'll talk about horror movies next week when it's going to be Halloween week, all week. Fright Night will come to visit us next week. Be prepared for it. So Clockwork Orange, I mean, I'm not going to explain the title to you. You have to Google it, research it. Um, it's set in the future, but how far in the future? It's all vague. Alex and his friends, they have a gang, the Droogs. They go on to perform violence during the night because they're bored in a modern world that doesn't accept who they are. They're taking drugs, they're raping women. Yes, folks, they're bad folks, but they make it look so groovy and cool. You want to go and do it with them, even though they're evil. And then in the movie, he is arrested for murder and rape, and they put him in prison and they put him through this psychological experiment to try to get him away from ever doing violence again. And what they do is they gave him some drugs, they tie him down in a movie theater seat, and they hold open his eyes with these clamps. Maybe you've seen Clockwork Orange, maybe you haven't. I hope you do one day. And so he can't close his eyes, and they show scenes of violence 8 hours a day until he goes so crazy that if he even sees anything that looks like violence or sex, by the way, he vomits, he retches, he feels physically ill. So they think it's just a big success. But of course, it backfires. And at the end of the movie, he becomes cured from that. And we're all rooting for Alex because he can't wait to get out there and start raping and killing again. And we're all hope he does. Because the whole movie is about free will, and they take that free will away if you want to live in a world like that. Watch Clockwork Orange. You tell me what you think. Anyway, Betty wants to write a extra credit, write it on El Topo. It's out there. I don't know if it'll, somewhere. They're not easy to find, these films. So if you find it, share it with us. Thank you. That's it on experimental films, except how do you feel about them? Have you ever seen one? Does that interest you? Does the avant garde interest you? Anyway, let's start a discussion this week and talk about it. And tell me your experience with art films. Do you have any? Do you want any? Is it a turn on, a turn off? You ever think about it? That's going to be a good discussion. I'll see you later on Wednesday where the story of film continues.